No, yeah, it's one of those weird. I mean, I think one of the things that's so fascinating about it is, I mean, not just race in general, but I think that
Mhm.
being black in America, which I find, and I guess I've always found this fascinating, is that not only, being black is X, but then there's this prescribed notion of like behavior and practices that black falls into. And I guess I've always been like, I mean, I guess it's true. I guess it's true. And I guess I do have some of those. But then the other part of me is like, I, I'm a really ridiculously weird person. Like, I don't think that people are like conscious of how, and anytime I look at myself, my minor biography, I'm always like, yeah. I mean, I went to college. I majored in biomedical engineering. I played basketball. You know what I mean? Like, I do theater. I take my kid to operas and museums all over the freaking world. Like, and then I'm just like, and then people are like, so then I'll ask people, so which one of those things is a black thing to do? Do you know what I mean? Because I do all of them. I cook bad French food. I don't know. I do a bunch of stuff. I cook better Italian food, but I don't know if that means black people are better making Italian food than French food, or is it just me? It's really so fascinating. And I think and that's true also about theater and theater making, is because there's this notion that I think if I were statistical, I grew up black and poor. If I was statistically accurate, I would probably grew up black and poor, or working class, or we just were, things were not easy for a while. Yeah. But I never write about being poor. Even the plays that are set in like urban settings, I never do the drug dealer hood play like that. Wedding Dance is the closest play you'll get to that, and that's not even a play about that. I mean, it's a play. That's a ridiculous play too. But I'm always like fascinated by it, because I guess, I don't know, they did, but they prescribe this stuff, and then you have to fight the prescriptions or try to, I don't know, let them know that the box that you think somebody's in, they're not in. I mean, they're just not in that box. I mean, it's, I said this about American theater. As much as I appreciate and like August Wilson, I do like August a lot, and I think his work is really important. So he writes these plays from one decade of the 20th century, and people think that's Black history. I'm like, it's not. They're like, well, why would you say that? It's like, for 100 years, he doesn't have a doctor in any of his plays. He's got 10 plays. There's not a Black doctor. There's not a Black dentist. There's not, I'm like, there's not a Black accountant, for crying out loud. I'm like, Black people have been, W. Du Bois went to freaking Harvard in the 19th century. I'm like, now, I'm not saying that August should have been aware of like class distinctions. August is writing his own plays. Yeah. But the thing that's a mistake is like, it is, this is not August's most famous play, but it flies in the face of Black history and logic to think that Fences is a play that's central to Black history. Because the central character in Fences does not want his son to go to college. And in 1954, you've got Brown versus the Board of Education. You've got all these people trying to integrate schools. That doesn't make sense in terms of actual African-American history, right? It does make sense for one person in Pittsburgh who was a baseball player. That does make sense. It makes sense for one dude. But when you're trying to ascribe that to Black history, I'm like, John Lewis is trying to go to school. I can't remember the guy who is master's program at the University of Alabama. Ruby Bates is going to school. Like, all of these people are going to school in the 50s. And for somebody to be like, you shouldn't go to school, you should work at the AMP. Come on. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm saying historically. It might make sense as a drama. It's just like, so it's one of those. Anyway.
It's a story of one family, not of all of us as a umbrella. A lot of times people forget that just because, I'm going to say this weird, and forgive me and correct me, I almost want to say that there's several Black people who've learned to navigate in a false neutralness through their world. I know I myself felt like one of them, except for I've always raged against the machine, and that's made people not like me very much. But I thought I was navigating neutrally, but there is no neutral. and that's what people don't realize. It's any neutrality you feel in a space is probably a false neutral, because you're either not paying attention or the people around you didn't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tough. I mean, it's interesting to use the term neutral. I mean, I think a lot of times people do it to survive. Like I don't know if you have this conversation. I've had this conversation 1,000 times in my life with actors who take a role that they don't like. And they're like, Dominic, I'm taking this role and I can't believe I'm doing this. And I'm like, you're doing it because you're getting a paycheck. Do you know what I'm saying? Like and there's, I mean, I don't want to reduce it to crass capital, but I just think that, I think sometimes there's a thing about survival. Like I do love Beckett as a writer. I do. I mean, when I was an undergrad, I really thought it was really cool. And I still think Beckett is brilliant in so many ways. But I know, part of the reason why I will, in job interviews or whatever, drop my Beckett or Brecht knowledge, or even my Shakespeare knowledge, is so I can get a job. You know what I'm saying? Like if I sit in there and I'm trying to get a job at UCLA and I'm just talking about Lorraine Hansberry and August Wilson and Angelina Grimke and Marita Bonner and like African-American playwrights that people have never heard of, they're not going to hire me, Yeah. But if I go on a dissertation about Godot or Endgame or Julius Caesar or anything, like, they're like, oh, he's a learned person. You know what I mean? So there's a little bit about, survival or something like that. I don't know. It's weird because I don't know if it is about being neutral and not trying to overturn apple carts constantly. But, I also, I'm aware, I'm like, a friend of mine was doing a Cat on a Hot Tin Roof years ago on Broadway with Kathleen Turner. And he was a little upset because he was like one of the butlers. and he was like, and he had 2 lines, like Stones come, and there's a whole thing about that. Anyway, so we went out one night and he was kind of upset that he was doing this role and perpetuating this stereotype and blah, blah, blah. I was like, man, you get $1,000 a week. You got a kid to feed. Go do, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you can do other stuff, or you just, you do this thing to do something else. I mean, I don't, everybody doesn't have to fight the fight the same way at the same time. I mean, I just think it's and I've told my friends, honestly, this, I was like, I've shot myself in the foot sufficiently for all of us. Like no one else needs to go into the room and do the thing that you're just like, I got hired. Well, I didn't get hired. I got interviewed for this musical. It was based on the Harlem Globetrotters. They ultimately hired Susan Laurie Parks. But so I'm in the interview, and the guy who is the executive vice president of Disney asked me, I have all these ideas about basketball, but I don't talk about the Harlem Globetrotters a lot. And I said, well, the truth of the matter is, if you wanted to be honest, to a lot of people, the Harlem Globetrotters are a bunch of clowns. I mean, even to African-American people. And Marion McClinton was in the room, and so was Oscar Eustis, actually. And they both looked at me like, did you just call them clowns? And I was like, yeah, they kind of are the crown princes of basketball. You know what I mean? I'm like, it's the truth, And I also knew when I said it, I wasn't going to get the job. It's like, yeah, I ain't getting the job. It's, all right, whatever. It's weird. Anyway. Like, why do I not want to work? No, because I do. I mean, I'm lucky because I do a bunch of stuff all the time, so that I am. Yeah, I'm fortunate. I don't have to do some things, a lot of things. It's good.
Yeah. The biggest question I have, because one of the things I've noticed, and that's one of we had to have a lot of conversations all throughout our relationship. Because I've always been, I don't know what you call, like hood adjacent, or we are almost a flip-flop. I grew up very dirt poor in a very predominantly Black neighborhood.
And I grew up middle class in white suburbia.
And so when we came together to talk about race in the theater, I said one of the biggest things that always rings false to me, because it's the lie I've heard my entire life, is that we can't find Black people. It's always a bunch of white people in a room saying we can't find them. And I keep on saying, well, look at your dance department. Look at But look at the fact that there's certain people who looked unprofessional in audition and you pass them over.
Right.
And how do you balance? The question always was, especially the way African American theater has been railing against this thing during COVID of
traditional theater.
How much do you not trust a theater if they can't field a team? If they say we don't have room for African American voices, directors, or they say we want to work with you, we want Black Lives Matter, but you look at their administration there and they can't even field a team of a diverse.
So there are a lot of things in there, but I was going to say one of them is the critical mass that you need to make any show happen. I mean, it's really, there are a couple things. So the first one I was going to say, the notion of the critical mass, part of the reason why a lot of kids who went to private school, once they got 5 Black kids in their private school, they did Raisin in the Sun, because 5 Black people can do Raisin in the Sun. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what they're like, this is what we got. But the other thing which I say to people, particularly for theater makers, is they're not lazy. Theater makers are not lazy. I'm talking about white theater makers primarily, if I wanted to use a marker for this. Mm-hmm. But people make theater because they are trying to make sense of their lives, or they're trying to escape their lives, or they're trying to affirm their existence. So they're trying to make sense. Those 3 things might be the same. You know, they're trying to make sense of their lives. They're trying to affirm their existence is crucial. And I think that one of the things about doing Black work, like real Black work, is that it challenges that assumption. So part of it is not that they can't field a team, but they don't want to field a team. Because like you just said, like you find them if you wanted to do a musical, you're going to go find them, but you don't want to find them when you want to do like a serious drama, or you even are thinking about doing a drama in a different way. Like I just think that the desire to do it, because at the end of the day, they're not trying to challenge their existence. They're trying to feel good about themselves, or say, you know, and then they get to go home and feel that they've done something good in the world, or they've seen something good in the world, or, you know, something makes sense in the world. And I think that that's part of the big issue, because, you know, one of the things I always think is really kind of funny to me, and this goes to season selection stuff, right? So even when you want to work with Black plays, and I'll just give you a simple, perfect example. So Lynn Nottage, who I like a lot. I like Lynn a lot. A very old friend of mine too, a very old friend of mine. It's always interesting that when I'm thinking about not crumbs from the Table of Joy, I'm thinking about Intimate Apparel, I'm thinking about Ruined. What Lynn does in her play is she allows somebody, a white character, to be the surrogate for the audience. She allows somebody to be in that white space, to be the person who's like translating, or the bridge, or whatever. And I think that what I'm getting at, though, is that they want, this goes to fielding a team, they want a team to operate in the right way, or they want a team that opens a window for them to come in and be like, have a white space in it. In Ruined, it's always interesting, you know, the problematics of Ruined are what they are, but Mama Nada gives the most valuable item in the world of the play, the diamond, to the white guy to go at some point repair something. But I'm like, but no, that's the most valuable object that you've given. And in Intimate Apparel, we've got this, you know, good, you know, Jewish seller of fabrics. Who is the good guy? The Black dude in Panama is a layabout after time, and he's no good. But I just think it's interesting that you give this audience this surrogacy so that they can enter the world. Now, you know, Lynn is telling a true story, which is a true story. But I'm just, but I mean, it's a true story for her. So I don't want to say it's a true story generically. It's a true story for her. But the thing that I think is important is that the institutions need to have that point of entry for them to feel comfortable with the work, or it becomes, you know, something else. Even August, you know, that's the Sillig family, the Rutherford B. Sillig people who are in there. It's interesting to think about it. It's like the times you've seen a Black play with only a Black cast, Like, and there's nobody else there. You're like, oh, that's kind of, I don't see that a lot. But you will see a cast full of white people with no one else, or you'll have, you know, ethnically ambiguous people who don't have any kind of like ethnic connection. But I think that, you know, for me, the challenge about fielding the team is, you know, what are you trying to do with the team? Like, because I have aesthetic concerns all the time. So I think the aesthetic concerns are, I want something to be challenging artistically, and I want it to be true artistically. So I want it to be, even if I think about dance, you know, Alvin Ailey dance is different than Paul Taylor, albeit both of the men are dead, but I'm saying the way in which they move in space is so significantly different. And it doesn't have to be Alvin Ailey, because Alvin Ailey might be, you know, I don't know, the Black Church or something. There are a bunch of different ways to be. And so when I talk about it, I actually think that I use music as a metaphor, because, you know, you got hip hop, you got gospel, you got R&B, you got black country, you got black zydeco, you got black classical music, you got all these different musics. And I think the notion that if you eliminated everything else and just said, oh, we're just going to have gospel music, I'm like, well, no, you're not just going to have gospel music. But I think oftentimes in conventional theater, that's what they think you should have. You should only have gospel, you know, or traditional conservative black thought space artistry or aesthetic. And that's where I'm always like, no, you know, let me try to find a thing that makes it different and comparative. But to go to your question directly, I think any institution can field the team. I think the questions that they ask themselves is, do I want to field the team, or do I want to field the team that's going to play in a certain way? Like, I want them to play nice in the way that I want them to play. And if they don't, or if they're unruly, what do I do with that? You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, you're not being, you know, I was just thinking about like the bizarre maleness where like, you know, men have this thing, like, I always love this thing where like men have this behavior point for women that I've always been entirely fascinated with. Like, what I mean by behavior point for women, it's only because I grew up with the mother that I grew up with, wherein someone will say to someone, you let your girlfriend or wife or partner say that to me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that's ever happened to you too. Like, you know, say something and then somebody will say something to Ricky, like, I can't believe she said that to me. I'm like, well, she's like, wait a sec. Like, why do you think she's not going to say whatever she's thinking? You know what I mean? Like, and why are you coming to me to open what she's saying? You know what I mean? Like, what is that, you know? And I remember, you know, my mother would be like, a man can control anything he wants, but he cannot control my mouth, was what my mother said. So it's like, you can't control my mouth. I can say whatever, she can say whatever she wants to. But no, but I'm saying, like, men, this goes to the race thing too. Men are like, oh, a woman's not supposed to say that. So I think a lot of, you know, artistic directors or institutions are like, well, black people aren't supposed to do that or deal with that or say that, or that's not an area that they're supposed to be investigating. I want you to deal with the prison pipeline, or I want you to deal with something else. Like, you know, why are you writing about, you know, why are you writing about black nerds? You know, I'm like, because I feel like it, you know? Like, no, what we want to do is we want to write about, you know, these other people who, you know, like, I mean, you know, to give you the perfect for example, when I was in grad school, I remember when I was in grad school, I was dating a woman who was getting her PhD. And we went out one time and somebody said, oh, it's great. African-American woman, you're getting your PhD. She says, I guess it's great for some people. My grandmother got a PhD at Oberlin, and this dude's face was broken. Like, what, your grandmother? Like, how does that happen? You know what I mean? I'm like, because she comes from generations of people who were in school. Like, what? Like, it's not like it's a new thing. But the thing was, she didn't go into the box, the prescribed box that said, oh, she grew up in Baltimore, so she was supposed to grow up poor in Baltimore. This is, you know, her way out, and she's got some education. She's like, no, you know, my grandmother and my grandfather, like, her father was a professor. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, but the notion that you're supposed to do X, or, I mean, the weirdest, I mean, this is sidebar and this is about me. so I played basketball in high school. So I was, a basketball player. I'm running around doing my thing. And then I took the PSATs. So my high school counselor, who had seen me every day, and this was going in my junior year, after you do the PSATs, he says, Dominic, is this you? And I was like, what do you mean is that me? He's like, wait, I thought you played basketball. I was like, I do. He's like, no, you're a National Merit Scholar. Like, I'm like, yeah. Like, those things aren't separable, right? Mm-hmm. Those things aren't separable. But in the narrative, in the psyche narrative of America, those things need to be separable. Do you know what I'm saying? Those things need to be separable. And I think that that's one of the big things that theater institutions have to come to grips with, the fact that they are perpetuating a lot of the things that the fact that, oh, you're a basketball player means you're an idiot, or you grew up in the ghetto. You're black, you grew up in the ghetto. You must know what ghetto life is like. It's like, why do I know that? Do you know what I mean? But I think but what it does is it makes the institutions feel, if I even want to be in a seat of somebody who goes to the Goodman or, a regional theater, it's like, oh, I'm a good, hardworking person, and now we're watching a story about these poor black people, and then in a few years, they're going to be able to be better. It's like, and so my life is okay, and I think that their life is going to be better in a few years after, I don't know, Corey grows up and goes into the military or whatever happens. I don't know.